Did you find those techniques helpful? I find oftentimes when my mind is scattered, doing that just a few minutes of the slow motion meditation has a very powerful way of cultivating absorption. In yoga parlance, it's a state of pratyahara, like an inward drawing of awareness, where you become less focused on the external world and more naturally drawn inside. And I find sometimes moving through the touch points to be a very helpful experience, particularly when in the middle of a busy day, a lot of stress, that sort of thing, but just to stop and just check in with a few of those touch points. When you soften the base of the tongue, it's a place, the whole ganglia of muscles where we tend to be tense. To let the belly be undefended for a few moments, or just to let the awareness come into the palms of the hands, can create a very powerful, even if it's a momentary shift from the narrative, the story, to just a moment of checking in with the here and now. I really have come to really love those particular techniques. So as I mentioned, just back from the spring retreat, from the week-long retreat, if there's any way to work this into your schedule, I would highly, highly recommend it. I don't know of a better investment of time and fortune, just to really put it in neutral and see what happens, experience what happens. These retreats tend to book up really, really fast, like within 12 hours. So they book 4 months ahead, and I'll let you know through the newsletter when the next one happens. It'll be in October. So the talk, what I'm going to share over these next few minutes, is adapted from a talk I gave at the retreat a year ago. There's a word called sutta, or in Sanskrit a sutra, which is a really pithy statement of what's true. The word sutta or sutra means it's a thread. They're sort of like the threads of truth that help you to get a sense of the nature of reality. They give you a sense of like a perennial truth, something that's true no matter what your culture. The Satipatthana Sutta is considered the sort of like the basic instruction from the Buddha, sort of like the stripped down teachings of how to meditate. Very, very interesting stuff. And actually the words that he used. I want to talk about another sutta tonight. I call it the Frank Sinatra Sutra. And I think when he said this, I'm not sure if he was aware of the impact of what he was saying in the sutta, but the essence of the practice is summarized in one of his most famous phrases. I'm sure you'll recognize it. Doobie doobie doo. I want to talk a little bit about the balance of effort and surrender. Do, be, do, be, do. I'm going to talk a little bit about the element of doing in life and in spiritual practice. A little bit about the element of being in spiritual practice and in life. And then what happens when you combine being and doing? What arises out of this balance of these two? And perhaps a little bit on how do you take it into the world where you're in a balanced place of mindful activity as well as mindful rest. I'm sure we all know what it's like to have something to do and to power through it. To just push and make it happen. You know what it's like when you're working out and you're really inspired and you kind of push right up into that pain threshold. On the other side is sort of like the endorphin rush, the benefit of that effort. Or if you ever had a project to do, you got to get the project out the door. You don't know how you're going to do it, but you bring all of your attention to it and you make it happen. And there's like a rush of release that happens on the other side of that effort. And in the Buddha's time, he engaged at different times into extraordinary effort. When he first started on his spiritual path, if you will, the practices of those times were practices of kind of extreme effort. It was about going beyond the mind by pushing the body and creating sort of these transcendent experiences. He kind of went beyond that effort to articulate what he called the middle way. But there are still times in his life, at the end of his spiritual quest, one night he resolved to sit at the base of the Bodhi tree and not to get up until he had realized the nature of reality. There's these famous teachings of, in sort of at the end of his practice, where he was visited by Mara, which is the word for illusion, who threw these armies of greed and hatred and confusion at him. And in his effort, he was able to see through the nature of illusion to the nature of reality. And there are all kinds of stories of spiritual adepts who've gone to extraordinary lengths to push themselves and to open to new horizons. Have you ever done a vision quest? They're often like this. I did a vision quest many, many years ago, way back in the ashram days, where we did a lot of purifying rituals, and we made prayer flags, and you would choose a spot, a little spot, and then you would take a string and you'd tie it around this little area at night. And it was a protection string to kind of hold you protected. And your practice was to stay awake all night. A pretty grueling thing. And I was staying at I chose this big granite outcropping, kind of overlooking a valley. And I was pretty vigilant at staying awake until I wasn't. And it was an amazing experience, not to linger on it too long, but I sort of slumped down, and my ear was against this big granite outcropping. And these deer came through. But all their hooves on the granite, it sounded like it was like 5,000 deer. And I sat bolt upright. And it was pitch dark. I couldn't see a thing. They knew I was there. I knew they were there. And I could hear them breathing. And it was an amazing experience of just an absolutely heightened awareness. And to feel like the spirit of the deer. If you ever hear in Native American language where they talk about brother deer and brother bear, there really was this sense of not just one deer, but the collective deer. It was an amazing experience. And for years after, whenever I go out in the woods, a deer would appear. Literally every time, over 100 times. But that effort created some shift in my consciousness that opened up some new possibilities. And we've all done this. We've all pushed ourselves at different times, and we've experienced the benefit, the other side of that practice of concentration and staying on point. It's a very, very helpful and powerful form of practice, and it can be balanced. But I thought it might be interesting to take just a few minutes and to sort of dive into a little concentration practice, and just to kind of monitor the effect of it. What I'd like to suggest is a technique that's oftentimes used for what's called access concentration practice, where you stay with this technique for days and days and days, and it can take you into very, very subtle, refined, concentrated practice. And that is to feel the breath outside your body, breathing through the nose, where you're feeling the breath across the upper lip and at the rim of the nostrils. Very challenging practice. But if you like, you can close your eyes, and we'll do just a few minutes and just sort of monitor the effect. So you might, with your eyes closed, just let the breath be relaxed. And sense if you can feel the breath at the rim of the nostrils, but limiting your attention to outside the nostrils. You'll find perhaps it's very, very subtle and very challenging to keep your mind on point, because one more pointer than we'll practice for a few minutes. In concentration practice, you are either on task or you're not. So when you notice that you've lost the technique, you're not analyzing your response, you just come right back to the technique. Feeling the breath on the upper lip and at the rim of the nostrils. Now you might release the technique and monitor the effect. What shifted on the inside? As you're ready, you might open the eyes, or if you like, you can remain with the eyes closed. So you may have had a number of experiences. One of them might be thinking, what a ridiculous practice. You might have felt how challenging it was to stay on point. You might have felt some kind of a calming. Anyone notice kind of a calming of the mind? A natural sort of drawing into one place of focus. The byproduct of concentration practice is a calming. This ADD scattered mind begins to settle. Not all at once. But this particular approach, when you can stay with the concentration practices, can take you into extraordinary states. The very powerful non-ordinary states. They're referred to in the Buddhist tradition as the jhanas, which are different states of concentration. There can be, the first can sort of be like an upwelling of joy, an upwelling of rapture, and then more and more subtle states arise as you stay in this very, very concentrated state. Some attentional strategies, some meditation techniques emphasize this approach quite predominantly. When you really focus on concentration, a lot of benefit comes out of this calming. A lot of insight can begin to arise out of this particular approach, and it could be a wonderful balance to a really scattered mind or over an emotional mind-body state. So some techniques will have you use this particular technique of the breath outside the body. There's some practices called the adhittana meditation, where the sitting is strong determination, where you sit with the intention not to move. And just that particular focus can have a riveting effect. Not to say it's easy, because it's not an easy practice at all. But if you ever have the time and the space to go deeper into intensive practice, you may find it to be extraordinarily compelling. When the mind does begin to settle, it's a really wonderful experience. And the Buddha taught this particular technique as a way to help the monks and lay people get access to a sense of joy, a sense of rapture, to experience the mind not wanting anything, but just to be in that sort of self-absorption, self-engaged process. There's a lot to be gained from this practice. And as you know, any time when you have been really disciplined, there's a lot of heat that gets generated. It requires effort. You see the movement of the mind. You're kind of almost wrestling with the mind and how it gets caught by these winds of wanting and the winds of aversion and hatred, the winds of confusion. And a clarity can begin to emerge out of these practices. However, as I've said before, there are a lot of very concentrated people on this planet who are miserable. Getting concentrated doesn't necessarily have much to do with liberation or being happy. So what this means is we need to include another element. And this element has to do with being. It has to do with abiding, with relaxing into our life and into our experience. Have you ever had the experience where you're leaving the house and you know you've left something behind, but you can't think of what it is? It happened to me tonight. I left without my microphone for recording. But have you noticed you leave the house and you know there's something you left behind, and then once you kind of settle in, you realize what it was? Sort of in that relaxing, like, oh, yeah. Or you can't remember someone's name, and you're straining and straining and straining, and then 2 o'clock in the morning, oh, it's Frank. How come I didn't know that? There's this great story of these two old guys are sitting around, and one guy says, boy, we went to this amazing restaurant last night. And his friend said, wow, I'd love a good restaurant. What's the name? And he said, oh, God. He said, what's the name of a flower? The guy said, begonia? He goes, no, not begonia. Tulip? No, not tulip. Rose? Oh, yeah. Hey, Rose, what was the name of that restaurant we went to last night? Tension inhibits intuition. So when you feel tense, you don't have access necessarily to these more expansive, non-ordinary states. So what relaxing does is it opens up the field. It can help give you access to a new perspective. And when we can't relax, we find ourselves caught in an ever-tightening clench. Reminded me of this story I'd heard so many years ago of this guy who was giving a talk. It was like an American Legion or something like that. And he hadn't done much public speaking, and he was really, really nervous. And he kept noticing that the back of his shirt had come undone. So he kept nervously tucking the back of his shirt down the back of his pants. And at the end of his talk, he started to walk away, and he realized he had tucked the American flag down the back of his pants. So learning how to relax can really, really benefit us in really big ways. And I thought we might do a little 3-minute inquiry into relaxation and to track what happens when you attune the mind-body state to a sense of simply resting. So if you like, you can close your eyes again. And let's revisit these touch points again. When you feel the forehead, and you imagine the forehead smoothing out, You may find if you imagine the forehead slightly cool, that there is an internal effect it has on the nervous system. If you consciously relax and soften the base of the tongue down into your throat, you might let that feeling of relaxation spread out to your jaw, to let the gap between your upper teeth and your lower teeth widen just a little bit. And just be with that, just track that. If you guide your attention to the lower belly and simply allow there the possibility of softening or letting go, what happens as you rest your attention there? If you rest your attention now in the palms of your hands, the thumbs and fingers, and let go of any holding, a deep, deep softening. Just track what happens when you soften, relax, and let go. If you feel the soles of the feet, imagine the blood flow. And sometimes if you imagine the feet warm, this too can add to the relaxation response. And you might just sense through the entire body, what could relax, what could let go. And in this state of relaxation, you might reflect on the following words from a famous Tibetan Lama about the spiritual practice of relaxation. Happiness cannot be found through great effort or willpower. Happiness is already present in open relaxation and letting go. Don't strain yourself. There is nothing to do or undo. Whatever momentarily arises in the body-mind has no real importance, has little reality whatsoever. Why identify with and become attached to it, and passing judgment on it and yourself? Far better to simply let the entire game happen on its own, springing up and falling back like waves, without changing or manipulating anything. Notice how everything vanishes and reappears again and again. Only your searching for happiness prevents you from seeing it. It's like a vivid rainbow which you pursue without ever catching, or a dog chasing its own tail. Wanting to grasp the ungraspable, you exhaust yourself in vain. As soon as you open and relax this tight fist of grasping, infinite space is there, open, inviting, and comfortable. So you might deepen the breath a little bit. You might, in your own time, let your eyes open, or again, feel free to remain with them closed. So there's a lot to be said for relaxation as a spiritual practice. To release efforting, to sense if happiness is already here, if you could just let go. It's a powerful inquiry. Some meditative traditions will have you focus and concentrate until you reach a point of exhaustion, and then you'll feel that sense of release. And some Native American traditions kind of draw on that sense of to push through the sense doors until there's sort of a transcendent release. Some Zen traditions do the same. And then there are some traditions, such as those in the Tibetan tradition, that openly embrace relaxation as the path. So then the question becomes, where's the balance? Do you move through life with a sense of unrelenting purpose? Do you move through life with a sense of relaxation and allowing, kind of letting life be a flow? Or is it a balance of the two? And I tend to think of this as a balance of the two. That when you combine relaxation and paying attention, very interesting stuff begins to happen. I've often talked about this model of, here's everything you know, here's all the stuff you don't know, and there's this line in between. The line between what you know and what you don't know, it'll move. And it'll move in direct proportion to your capacity to relax and pay attention. When you can relax, you soften, your field begins to open. When you pay attention, you begin to see more and more into the nature of your own experience, your own reactivity. And in many ways, it's the power of any time that you pause. It's also the power of a cumulative time of intensive practice, just as we experienced in these 7 days. Relax and pay attention. And something very interesting emerges, and you could call it a faculty of knowing. There's a certain knowing that arises. We've all had those moments of knowing. I remember the first time I went fishing with my dad, I was maybe 5 or 6. And I said, how do I know I'm going to have a fish? How do I know when I got fish? And he said, you'll know. And it's true, I knew. I like to ask couples, like, when did you know that you had some destiny, some karma with this person? It's always a fascinating thing, just to sort of hear that, this thing happened and that thing happened. I just knew. I knew when I first got initiated into transcendental meditation when I was 15, I knew that I would be doing this practice for the rest of my life. I just knew it. There's a very powerful instruction that Thich Nhat Hanh gives that can be a very powerful way of bringing your attention to this sense of relaxing and paying attention. Very simple instruction. You probably have heard this before, but if you like, let's revisit this. If you like, you can close your eyes once again. As you feel the breath, and Thich Nhat Hanh offers using these words or some variation of these words. As I breathe in, I know I am breathing in. As I breathe out, I know I am breathing out. Or you might simply use the words on the in-breath to say in, on the out-breath, out. through this alchemy of relaxation and paying attention, you can know the ease of the breath. You can know that intimate moment of the pause, the space between the in-breath and the out-breath. As I hear, I know that I am hearing. As I feel, I know that I am feeling. And you might sense in these remaining moments the possibility, when you can relax and pay attention, that this quality of knowing has a spontaneous, effortless quality to it. Feel like once again you can let your eyes open or remain with them closed. There are all these incredible faculties, these winds that are always pulling our attention away from the direct experience of here and now. We experience them as the winds of aversion, of anger, judgment, blame, the winds of wanting, of planning, of fantasy, the winds of anxiety and restlessness, the winds of heaviness, sleepiness, the winds of doubt and self-criticism. These five winds are constantly pulling us away. What concentration can do is to sort of find a way to navigate through those waves, to stay present through those waves. Relaxation allows you to experience them. I find anger to be such a helpful example. When something happens and you're angry, you're completely identified with that anger. Then at some point, as you feel the anger moving through, it might be a moment or two, it might be 2 days later, you actually realize that you're angry. And then you have a choice. You have a choice to be angry or to be with your anger. And that experience of recognizing and knowing that anger is there allows you to shift your relationship to it. And in that shift in identity, there's a possibility of something new emerging. Rather than holding on to it, the capacity to recognize it, to make room for it, perhaps to let it fall away. So as you meditate, anytime you pause, there are spontaneous knowings that arise. Oh, I need to adjust my posture. Oh, I need to buy that stuff for dinner tomorrow night. Oh, here's the anxiety about that project I have for tomorrow. Though that faculty of knowing can be a very interesting thing, and there's what's described as wholesome knowing and unwholesome knowing. Just to touch on that for a moment. Kind of the unwholesome knowing is sort of the hypervigilance. It's when you're sort of caught in anxiety where you are just scanning for danger, where you're just sort of like catastrophe waiting to happen. And your system is in a whole state of alarm. So that sense of wanting to know is about control. A couple were telling me about all these arguments they were getting into around remodeling their house and the numbers they would do on each other. And he was telling me how he wanted to put in this really cool sound system. And his strategy was to say to his wife, well, we can do it, it's only $8,000, when he knew it was $4,000. So there'd be the freak out at $8,000, and we'd come and say, wow, I found it's only 4,000. Anyway, we really get to work that hypervigilant knowing in each other in lots of different ways. But there's another kind of knowing that's very, very simple. It's very spontaneous. To realize when your mind is grasping, to know when your mind is pushing away. Just in that spontaneous knowing, there is a very powerful moment of mindfulness. The capacity not to judge your experience, but to see it, and then to recognize that there are actually choices. So there's a whole other section that I wanted to talk about, and my choice is either to start talking really, really fast, or to just do a little brief summary. I'm fascinated by this relationship between mindfulness, meditation, and intuition. It's been kind of a lifelong fascination for me, and I lead some retreats that kind of explore this way that we can recognize what is really true for ourselves. And it really does come down to this skillful use of being, the skillful use of doing. And just a couple examples. I heard this one story many years ago about this fellow he was a salesman. He was going to see the president of this company, who was really well known for completing patents that other people couldn't complete. He was a really, really wealthy guy. So he went to this guy's secretary, said, I'd like to have an appointment. And the secretary said, well, he's in his idea room. I said, well, when's he going to be out of his idea room? He said, I have no idea. He just comes out when he's done. And later he got to meet with him. He said, so what's this idea room? And he showed him. It was a very, very simple room, and it had just a simple table with a yellow legal pad and pencils and a cot. And he said, so what is it? He said, well, I take the problem, I write down the problem, I write down everything I know about the problem, and then I lie down on the cot, and then it comes to me. That sense of using sort of like willful effort, but then consciously using relaxation to shift consciousness. As Einstein said, no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness that created it. It's a great story of the first Rockefeller. Whenever he had a really big decision to make, he had a ritual that he would go through. He would go to his country club, and he would play a full round of golf, and then he would go back to his room and take a nap. And at the end of his nap, he would have his decision. So consciously using relaxation as a tool for shifting awareness can be a very, very powerful thing. So how do we take this into our busy, active lives? And for me, I really see it's all about taking that backward step. It's all about taking that moment to really just to pause. And when you can pause and just stop and relax, there can be a little bit of a reset button. Sometimes it doesn't take so long. But when you recognize that when you pause and when you step back, there can be a profound recognition of what's pulling you away from your center, but also a sense of coming back to really touch into what you know is most important for yourself. So thank you for your kind attention and for my little rant here. Quick announcement or two. If you'd like to be on the mailing list and you're not, you can sign up in the back. As always, thank you for your generous support for the church and IMCW and me and my lavish lifestyle. And there's also, in 2 weeks, I will be leading the 6th annual men's retreat. It's a day-long retreat. Men of all backgrounds and orientations are more than welcome. It is a really cool time. And when we do chant the sound of Om, and it is the coolest thing to chant the sound of Om with a bunch of guys. So, Maybe that will lure you if you know someone who might be interested.
We have tea outside.
Great. So if you'd like to stay for a few minutes, there's tea outside, and the final thing is to recognize here that if you are a doing person, if you're more inclined toward doing, the being practices will bring you back into balance. If you're more of a beer, you'll find the doing, the willful practices, will bring you back into balance. And if you're a knowing person, don't worry about any other techniques. You're fine. So thank you again. Perhaps we'll see you for tea out in the lobby. Have a wonderful night, wonderful week. Talk to you soon.